We are going to study this and we are not going to cry. Everything is very, very rounded. Everything's quite soft. There are no sharp, harsh edges to anything. You can see the way that the skull is based on a circle. You can almost imagine the circle here as it goes around. Or look at this one here from Porco Rosso. You can see the back of the circle, and then you can see the way it connects up to the forehead. But it isn't just the head that is like this. If I zoom in here, now we can take a look at Ponyo, and you can see that her eye is a almost perfect circle. Again, if you look at Kiki's, you can see how circular they are. Where you don't have perfect circles, you still have pretty curved edges. When you look at other anime, it's quite common for this area to be quite sharp. Whereas with the Ghibli style, it's really very, very rounded, very curved. Again, looking at Mei, you can see a very rounded jawline. And then again, if you look at this character, you can see all of the circles on very clear display. The circle at the back of the head here, which comes all the way around and into the forehead. The very circular eyes, and the very curved jawline. Even if you look at the clothes, you can see a lot of curved edges. Quite often in anime, you would draw a collar with pointed edges. You might draw a collar more like this. See how those edges are very sharp? Now look at Mei's collar here. Look how the edges are round and very soft. Same thing over on her shoulders. Look at that nice round line there. Having lots of rounded edges like this makes the style feel very safe. Compare that to, for example, a style like the Dragon Ball art style, where everything's very sharp and very pointy and it feels more dangerous. Now, in terms of the proportions, you can expect some pretty specific things with the Ghibli art style. The eyes tend to be quite a bit smaller than you see in other anime art styles. If you look, for example, at the art style of My Hero Academia, you can see really quite large eyes that take up most of the space here. One very typical rule of thumb when you're drawing eyes is for there to be one eye width in between the eyes. She has quite a lot more than one eye width between her eyes. It's more like an eye and 3/4. Again, that we've got way more than one eye width here, much closer to an eye and a half, maybe even 2 eye widths in between the eyes. Now I find that when you go to the 3/4 view, this can have some interesting results, because what Ghibli tend to do is when they move to the 3/4 view, they tend to try and maintain that distance between the eyes. So you can see here we've still got significantly more than one eye width in between the eyes. To me, this makes the 3/4 view look a little bit wonky, so I always am tempted to move this eye a little bit more this direction. But this is a deliberate choice of Studio Ghibli. They want the eye space to be longer in the front view, I think because it makes the characters look a little more cutesy. While we're looking at the eyes, it's worth pointing out how minimalist those eyes really are. You tend to get eyes that are drawn with perhaps 2 lines, one for the upper eyelashes and one for the lower eyelashes, and then a circle in the middle which gives you the pupil. When the character has dark eyes, what you tend to get is just a solid fill with either a black or a brown. Now when a character has blue eyes, we've got that same circle, but now inside the circle we've got a pupil and a highlight. The other facial features can be drawn with relatively few lines as well. A line or maybe 2 lines for the bridge of the nose, and then some lines indicating the nostrils. Ears are drawn very simply. We'll take a look at this character from The Boy and the Heron. You can see we've just got one line here, and then we've got a circle here for the sort of opening of the ear, and that's it. And then we're drawing the overall shape of the ear, just with an oval that attaches to the side of the head. The last thing that I wanted to point out in terms of the proportions is the distance that you often get between the nose and the mouth. The nose tends to be drawn pretty close to the eyes, whereas the mouth tends to get quite a large gap here. Marnie's, again, it's not as large as the last example, but that's still quite a significant gap there. Ponyo's, again, it's the same large gap. With Chihiro, we get a large gap again. If we look at some of the characters in the profile view, again, this one from The Boy and the Heron, you can see some of the things that I was talking about, but from a different perspective. This curve here in the profile view is actually really distinctive of the Ghibli style. A lot of characters in other anime will not have quite this pronounced a curve to their forehead. A lot of anime noses are a lot more pointed. A typical anime nose you'd expect to come down, and then perhaps you'd expect it to come out and then up like this and then back, so that you get a kind of upturned nose. But with the Studio Ghibli characters, the nose doesn't tend to get that upturn, and it tends to be quite small in appearance from the profile view as well. One thing that I find interesting to note from the profile view is that most characters don't have this section here drawn out, this area that would connect the chin to the ear. I think that's part of the overall sort of squishy, soft look that the faces are supposed to have. Okay, now let's take a look at some hair. The hair is divided into these large clumps. A lot of modern anime tends to have much thinner clumps than this, and while we're on that note, you can look at the very edges of the hair, the tips. Again, a lot of modern anime will do very razor sharp edges to the hair, like this. Now, a lot of what I've said so far has applied to mostly the female characters, and that's because most of the Ghibli movies have largely female protagonists. A lot of the things I've said do still apply to the male characters. If you look at Howl here, you can see the overall rounded approach to the face. All of the edges here are very, very curved. The eyes are still very rounded. The hair drawn into these large flowing clumps. Some of the men tend to have longer noses, for example. There's less of a distance here between the nose and the mouth than in a lot of the female characters. If Howl were to be a female character, his nose would probably be a lot more stubby. It might sit a lot closer to the eyes, maybe something like this. Howl also has an overall longer face than a lot of the female characters do. If you compare Howl to this female character over here, you can see the way that her face is much, much rounder than his. Her head shape overall is much closer to a circle than his. Alright, that is enough about proportions for 1 year, I think. Let's take a look at the colouring. You find a lot of bright, really quite highly saturated colours. If you look at this yellow here, that's quite bright. If you look at the orange, that's almost all the way out to the end of the wheel. These colours are even brighter perhaps than other Ghibli movies. If you take a quick look at the shading, what you get really are single shadow shapes. Look at this simple shadow shape that starts here, goes all the way up, comes in a little bit there, and goes all the way around the face, and all the way around the hair, and then back down on this side. This whole area is covered in one single continuous shadow shape. You can see that effect here again on this character. One continuous shadow shape all the way down the right hand side. One continuous shadow shape all the way up that left hand side. A little bit there, a little bit there, and the rest is in highlights. We don't really use highlights in this style. We don't use blending. We don't use any fancy ambient occlusion or anything like that. We just have one single tone that separates the light from the shadow. And right now, everything I've said about the Ghibli art style so far is, well, basically I've just said that everything about the style is pretty simple, right? And the simplicity of style allows for the characters to be very emotive, very expressive. With more detailed styles, you very rarely will see an animated character doing anything near this expressive. It's much more about telling a story with the image and having the image resonate with people and get across a certain emotion, a certain message. It's much more about that than it is about having complicated rendering or complicated line work. Alright, everything I've said so far applies to most of the protagonists in Ghibli movies and to a lot of the sort of main side characters as well. But there are characters where a lot of this stuff doesn't apply. Let's take a look at Yubaba. You can see how basically every rule that I set up in the early moments of this video is totally ignored. If I just zoom out and you can see how Yubaba compares to some of the other characters in my collage here. She really is totally different in design, in shape, language, in every way. So how would I put all of this advice into action to design one of my own characters in the Ghibli style? On the left, what we've got is my original character Rin. I drew her in a semi-realistic style quite some years ago now. And on the right, what we're seeing develop is my attempt to translate that into a Ghibli style, using that much rounder shape language, using the simplified lines, the adjusted proportions, and the simple Ghibli shading.